Tonight, we uncover a story buried beneath centuries of faith, a rivalry older than any religion, and a secret that may change everything we think we know about divine power. They say the walls of Rome hold every secret, but some are buried far deeper, tucked beneath marble floors polished by pilgrim footsteps and whispers that refuse to fade even after 2,000 years of retelling. And as you walk through the Vatican at night, with only dim lanterns and your questionable decision-making to guide you, you can already sense the shift in the air, the subtle pressure that warns you probably won't survive this. And yet here you are, wandering further into the labyrinth. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, because imagining someone listening to Vatican conspiracies at 3 a.m. is my favorite pastime. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together as you slip past a tapestry of St. Peter that definitely seems to be side-eyeing you for rummaging around after hours. The corridor narrows, leading toward a heavy oak door once used by papal scribes during the Renaissance, its surface carved with angels who seem exhausted by centuries of theological paperwork, and beyond it lies a staircase spiraling downward into the Apostolic Palace's oldest foundation, older than the papacy itself, older even than Constantine's basilica. With each step, the air cools and thickens, carrying faint traces of dust, old incense, and something distinctly metallic, like blood long dried and memory long concealed. At the base of the staircase, you find a chamber lit by a single lantern perched on a stone pedestal, the flame trembling as though nervous about what's waiting in the dark. The room's walls are lined with locked cabinets, each marked by Roman numerals and sealed with wax stamps imprinted by popes whose names you learned but immediately forgot in high school history class. And in the center of the chamber, beneath a cracked slab of marble, lies an iron hatch no tourist or even most clergy ever see. You kneel, prying it open with both hands, and a gust of stale air rises, dry, heavy, ancient, carrying with it a sense that you've just tipped something sacred off balance. Beneath the hatch is a ladder carved directly into stone, worn by centuries of use, though no one will admit who used it or why. You descend into a cylindrical vault where the walls curve inward like the ribs of a buried beast, and on a pedestal at the center rests a long wooden chest adorned with faded gold leaf and symbols you don't recognize. Not crosses, not churros, not anything from mainstream Christian iconography. Instead, the carvings resemble branching lines, almost genealogical in form, as if someone were trying to map a family tree too dangerous to write openly. You open the chest, expecting relics, bones, perhaps another Codex Giga-style project someone regretted starting, but instead you find a single scroll, tightly wound and bound with crimson thread. Its vellum is remarkably well preserved, smoother than it has any right to be after centuries underground. And when you unroll it carefully, a shiver passes through you, not from cold, but from recognition. The scroll contains a list of names, written in Aramaic, Greek, and Latin, each translated in tidy marginal notes added centuries later. The mainstream historical fact leaps immediately to mind. Early Christian communities often kept genealogies to establish legitimacy, especially for messianic claims, and records were meticulously maintained even as empires rose and fell. But what you're looking at doesn't match any genealogy known to scholars. This one begins with a name every human on earth recognizes, a name whispered in prayer, shouted in anger, sung in stained glass cathedrals, printed on bumper stickers, and tattooed on people who definitely did not read the fine print, Jesus of Nazareth. But rather than ending where tradition insists, the scroll continues with a branching line of names, moving forward into decades after the crucifixion, as though tracing a lineage that should not exist at all. You blink slowly, half expecting the names to rearrange themselves out of embarrassment, but no, the ink holds steady, unbothered by your shock. And then there's the quirky tidbit, the kind that should feel absurd but somehow doesn't in a place like this. One marginal note claims that early scribes protected this genealogy by hiding it inside hymnals, disguising it as melody so monks unknowingly sang the names during morning prayers. Whether that's true or just the work of an imaginative medieval prankster, you can't help wondering how many holy chants were actually undercover family announcements. You step back, heart thudding, as the lantern flame bends slightly, drawn toward the scroll as though the air itself is trying to read over your shoulder. You swallow, remembering that bizarre moment from our previous story when medieval people used crocodile dung sunscreen. And you think humans have always done strange things, but this hits a new level. Your mind races with questions, but the quiet in the vault feels deliberate, almost protective, as though the room has grown accustomed to secrets so large they warp the air around them. You run your fingertips across the scroll one last time, feeling the groove of each ancient letter, and the ink's warmth surprises you, as if the genealogy isn't simply recorded but alive, still moving through history, still breathing through the centuries. And just as the thought forms, you notice something you missed before. Tiny annotations in the margins written in an unfamiliar script, repeated beside several names. You lean closer, and as the lantern flickers you can finally decipher the phrase, "Kept by the church." Your breath catches. The scroll is not a record but a warning, or perhaps a responsibility. You roll the scroll carefully, hands trembling now not from fear, but from the staggering realization that you've uncovered the Vatican's most guarded secret, one that blurs the line between faith, history, and heredity. The room feels smaller suddenly, and somewhere above your head you hear a faint creak, like footsteps from a different century pacing the floor. Whatever this genealogy represents, whatever truth it suggests, you feel it pulling you deeper into the story, deeper into a labyrinth of bloodlines, guardians, and doctrines built not only on faith, but on fear of what might happen if this lineage ever came to light. You place the scroll back into its chest, close the lid gently, and as the lantern dims, the vault exhales around you, slow, ancient, expectant, like a secret stretching its limbs after centuries of silence. You ascend from the vault with the scroll's impossible genealogy still pulsing through your thoughts, your footsteps echoing softly along the cold stone staircase like you're being counted by a presence that wants to make sure you don't forget where you came from or where you're going. And the moment you step back into the corridor, the Vatican's air feels different, heavier, as though the building itself is aware you've discovered something it spent centuries training itself not to acknowledge. Yet despite the weight pressing in around you, your curiosity tugs you deeper into the palace, down a hallway you've never seen on any tour map, its lamps flickering with the kind of dramatic timing that suggests the church needs to hire a full-time electrician. You move quietly, your fingers brushing frescoed walls depicting saints with expressions far too knowing for comfort, as if they've been side-eyeing this bloodline situation for centuries and are frankly tired of keeping the secret. Then the corridor widens into a long, vaulted gallery filled with manuscripts resting on marble pedestals, some open, some sealed, all protected by glass, so old it ripples like frozen water. The room carries that familiar blend of incense, parchment, and mild administrative anxiety, the smell you get when a library knows you're about to touch something you probably shouldn't. And as you step inside, a draft lifts the hem of your sleeve like an unseen hand guiding you toward a specific pedestal positioned at the far end beneath a narrow stained glass window. On it lies a bundle of letters bound with fraying twine, the pages yellowed but intact, and as you gently untie the bundle, the top letter reveals its authorship. A bishop from Gaul writing in the late 2nd century, his script elegant but tense, as though he knew even while writing that these words were a risk. The mainstream historical fact comes to mind immediately. Early Christian communities across Europe were deeply diverse in belief and practice, with many sects maintaining traditions that differed from the emerging orthodoxy in Rome, and bishops frequently wrote letters to one another seeking guidance, clarification, or, occasionally, permission to disagree politely or dramatically. But this letter is different. It refers to the lineage, described with a blend of reverence and trepidation, and mentions a small family living in a remote valley near the Rhone, protected by a circle of local believers who insisted they carried a direct connection to the teacher, a term scholars usually apply to Jesus when texts intentionally avoid messianic titles. Your pulse quickens as you read the bishop's concern that rumors of a child, possibly more than one, were circulating among rural congregations, threatening to undermine Rome's efforts to unify doctrine, and you feel the pages tremble faintly, though whether from age or anticipation you can't be sure. As you continue reading, you discover a quirky tidbit buried between lines of theological panic. The local villagers believe the children bore tiny birthmarks shaped like fish, the early Christian ichthys symbol, and while you doubt dermatology played a major role in apostolic succession, the detail has that strange mix of superstition and sincerity that ancient communities excelled at, right up there with using crocodile dung sunscreen and calling it a good idea. The bishop, clearly overwhelmed, writes that he planned to travel to Rome for counsel because the matter remains open to debate, a phrase that in this context feels far less academic and far more like, "I am not touching this alone." You set the letter aside, your breath softening as the gallery's silence folds around you, and your gaze drifts to another document in the bundle. This one from a North African presbyter writing nearly a century later, referencing a hidden family protected by a group of wandering ascetics who called themselves the Keepers of the Branch. His tone is anxious, almost pleading, as though he feared the knowledge would bring ruin upon both the family and the church if it ever became public. He describes how the keepers traveled between communities, shielding certain individuals from persecution, not because the individuals were dangerous, but because their existence raised uncomfortable theological questions. Questions about lineage, inheritance, and whether the divine could pass through blood in the same way earthly traits do. You feel that strange warmth again, that awareness humming just beneath your skin, and you wonder how many hands have touched these pages, how many hearts raced while reading the same words under candlelight, whispering prayers that the truth would remain safely buried. You move to a third letter, written during the height of the Carolingian Empire, and the shift in style is immediate. This writer is less afraid and more bureaucratic, like someone filing the world's most stressful HR report. He writes of a noblewoman from Aquitaine who claimed descent from the ancient line of Jerusalem, carefully guarded by monks who recorded her ancestry in the margins of psalters, embedding lineage in prayer so anyone reading it would assume they were simply reciting devotional text. The letter explains how this ancestry was quietly acknowledged among a small circle of scholars, though most dismissed it as symbolic, metaphorical, or inconvenient. Yet the details align too closely with the earlier letters for coincidence, and as you trace your fingers across the script, you begin to see a pattern forming, a lineage moving through continents, centuries, and political upheaval, threading itself through Europe like a quiet pulse, never fully extinguished, always resurfacing in unexpected places. The stained glass window above the pedestal casts a shaft of cool blue light across your hands, and in it the ink momentarily glimmers, as though responding to your attention, urging you to keep reading. So you do. You open another document, this one a monastery record from the Pyrenees, describing how a pair of siblings arrived seeking refuge from unnamed threats, accompanied by a group of monks who spoke Aramaic fluently despite living thousands of miles from its homeland. The siblings carried with them a small chest, sealed with wax bearing a symbol you recognize now, the same branching line emblem you saw on the chest beneath the papal throne. The record ends abruptly, with a note that the siblings joined the community, though no further mention of them appears in subsequent archives, as though they were absorbed into the folds of history or intentionally erased from it. You step back, mind spinning, and the gallery seems to breathe with you, the manuscripts shifting almost imperceptibly as if turning themselves toward you. You think about how many scholars dismissed such genealogical hints as myth, confusion, or wishful thinking, and yet here they lie. Letters, testimonies, records, all pointing toward a family that wasn't supposed to exist, a lineage threading itself quietly through Europe long after the Gospels ended. And as you stand there, surrounded by centuries of paper breathing its dusty secrets into the dim air, one overwhelming realization settles over you. This wasn't just a hidden family. It was a protected one, guarded, tracked, preserved, not by rebels or conspirators, but by the church itself, the very institution that publicly denied such a lineage could ever have existed. You exhale slowly, the truth washing over you in a wave both exhilarating and terrifying, and as the lanterns flicker again, casting long shadows across the gallery, something sharpens in the air, a sense that the story is no longer content to sit quietly on shelves. It wants to be found. It wants to be finished. And you, whether by fate or by exceptionally poor decision-making skills, are already in too deep to turn back now. You leave the gallery with its trembling manuscripts and half-forgotten genealogies, stepping back into a corridor that feels narrower than before, as though the stone itself has inched closer to listen, and the soft tapping of your footsteps seems louder now, echoing like a metronome marking the rhythm of a secret that has followed you through centuries of letters. You can feel yourself being pulled, not physically, but by that strange gravitational force that stories exert when they want to be finished. And tonight's story has grown heavy with intention. You walk toward a small side door you swear wasn't there earlier, its frame carved with delicate flourishes of vines and branches that look eerily similar to the genealogical symbols on the scroll beneath the papal throne. And when you push it open, you find yourself in a long chamber lit by a single hanging lamp whose flame dances like it's whispering gossip about everything you've just read. This room is different from the others, less archival, more monastic. Its walls lined with simple wooden desks and narrow shelves containing journals, prayer books, and letters written in dozens of hands across dozens of centuries. And at each desk lies a single quill, as though the priest who worked here stepped out only moments ago. You run your fingers across the closest journal and feel the indentation of a seal you recognize from section 1, the symbol of the branching line. When you open the journal, the ink strokes reveal a careful, deliberate hand, a priest writing by candlelight sometime in the 11th century, describing a group known only as the Custodes Nominis, the keepers of the name, a clandestine order within the church tasked not with suppressing heresy or defending doctrine, but with quietly protecting a lineage no one publicly admitted existed. The mainstream historical fact that immediately flickers through your mind is this: medieval monastic orders often developed specialized roles, scriptorium work, medical care, manuscript preservation, even astronomical observation, but nowhere in any official document is there mention of a group assigned to track bloodlines, let alone a bloodline that could destabilize the theological architecture the Church spent millennia constructing. Yet here, in this forgotten chamber, the evidence rests patiently under your hands. The priest writes of traveling across France, Iberia, and the Italian peninsula to find individuals whose ancestry tied them to the ancient line preserved in the scroll, offering them shelter under the guise of charity, pilgrimage, or scholarly interest. He describes how the custodes never revealed the full truth to those they protected, not because they were cruel, but because the knowledge itself was too dangerous. If the lineage were ever widely known, or worse, politicized, it might fracture Christendom into factions fighting not over doctrine but blood. As you turn the page, a quirky tidbit leaps out with unexpected charm. The custodes apparently used coded embroidery on their robes to communicate messages about the lineage, incorporating tiny patterns into the hems that, to the untrained eye, looked like decorative stitches but, to fellow keepers, indicated locations, dates, or individuals of interest. The idea that entire theological conspiracies might have been passed secretly through medieval fashion feels strangely delightful, and you can almost imagine a monk angrily rehemming his robe after realizing he had accidentally signaled the wrong village. But the journal grows darker as the centuries progress, tracing how political storms, schisms, and crusades forced the custodes to adapt, sometimes hiding the bloodline among nobility, sometimes among peasants, sometimes within monasteries where the individuals themselves never knew why they were given such generous protection. Another entry describes a custodes priest living during the Black Death, who concealed a small family in a shuttered monastery under the pretense of quarantine, and the account is written with such weary tenderness that you feel the ache of his choices even now, 8 centuries later. As you move through the journals, more details surface about the order's structure. 3 ranks, each sworn to silence, with only the highest permitted to read the full genealogy, strict protocols for travel, coded prayers that functioned as identity checks, and a vow to guard the name until the world loses its appetite for certainty. A line so bleak and poetic you briefly wonder if medieval priests invented existentialism. You reach a journal from the Renaissance, written in a flamboyant hand full of flourishes and dramatic loops. clearly a priest who would have thrived on social media. And he describes a crisis within the custodes when a scholar in Florence began circulating rumors that a particular noble family claimed descent from Jesus. Whether the rumor was true or merely an unfortunate coincidence is unclear, but the priest writes of scrambling across Italy to intercept documents, silence gossip, and redirect suspicion, all while juggling political tension between the Medici, the papacy, and various scholars who were, frankly, too caffeinated for their own good. In a margin note, half complaint, half confession, the priest writes, "The matter remains open to debate," which in this case seems less about doctrine and more about whether he was ever going to get a full night's sleep again. You close the flamboyant journal and reach for another. This one from the 18th century, written by a custode scholar who describes how Enlightenment thinkers stumbled dangerously close to uncovering the lineage while studying early Christian texts. He recounts having to discreetly remove or reinterpret certain manuscripts to prevent them from sparking inquiries the Church could not safely entertain, and his tone carries the fatigue of someone who has spent his life standing between truth and catastrophe. But the most revealing journal is the last one you open, a 19th century account written in crisp Latin, describing how industrialization, political upheaval, and the rise of historical criticism forced the custodes into even deeper secrecy. The priest laments that modern scholars would not be satisfied with metaphors, parables, or tradition. They wanted evidence, data, genealogical charts, and if they ever found the scroll beneath the papal throne, he feared it would not merely shock the world, but divide it irrevocably. He ends the journal with a chilling statement. If the lineage survives, it must do so in shadows. If the truth is spoken, it must be whispered. If the name is carried, it must be carried alone. You exhale, the weight of centuries settling into your bones. And as you close the journal, the flame of the hanging lamp steadies, casting the chamber in a warm, contemplative glow. The air grows quieter, more reverent, like a room holding its breath, and you feel once again the presence that has been following you. Not hostile, not demanding, just watching, waiting for you to understand that the story of the hidden bloodline is not about scandal or power. It's about protection, preservation, the impossible balancing act between faith and fear. You step back into the corridor, feeling the eyes of centuries follow you, and you sense the next destination already calling, a place where the custodes attempted to do the impossible, finish a genealogy they themselves were afraid to comprehend. You walk deeper into the Vatican's hidden arteries, past doors that seem to shift slightly when you're not looking, as though the building itself is adjusting its posture while you pass. And the moment you descend another narrow stairwell, this one older, carved unevenly as if by hands unsure whether they were building a staircase or carving a confession. The air changes again, thickening into a cool, mineral darkness that tastes faintly of iron and centuries-old ink. At the bottom lies a long stone corridor lined with alcoves, each holding a single object beneath dusty glass domes. A fragment of parchment, a broken seal, a wax imprint, a tarnished medallion, artifacts abandoned partway through stories the Church never finished telling. You step into the corridor's center, your footsteps muffled by the sheer weight of secrecy pressing down from above, and the lantern you're carrying casts long, trembling shadows that stretch like fingers reaching for the truth you're about to disturb. Ahead, the corridor opens into a circular vault unlike any you've seen tonight. Its ceiling is painted with faded frescoes depicting trees with interwoven branches, a pattern unmistakably genealogical, and beneath it sits a massive desk carved from olive wood, its surface scarred by centuries of quills, elbows, and existential crises. Stacks of parchment are arranged in meticulous but unfinished piles, each tied with colored ribbon marking different periods of history, and pinned to the desk's edge are small notes written in Latin, Greek, Syriac, Old French, and, in one chaotic corner, handwriting that looks suspiciously like Gothic German. The entire room feels like a centuries-long group project abandoned by every generation that touched it. You inhale the heavy air, catching the faint scent of beeswax and myrrh, and as you step toward the desk, your hand brushes a parchment so brittle it sighs at your touch. The mainstream historical fact surfaces instantly. Medieval genealogical practice was extremely precise, especially among noble families and ecclesiastical lineages. with scribes trained to maintain ancestry records stretching back hundreds of years, not because they loved paperwork, but because inheritance, legitimacy, and authority depended on accurate family ties. But this genealogy is nothing like those. It is not designed to confirm royal blood, noble lineage, or succession rights. Instead, it is structured like a river branching through time, tracing not political power, but biological continuity, one name flowing into another, century after century, through wars, kingdoms, migrations, plagues, crusades, and reforms. You examine the upper portion of the parchment pinned to the desk, recognizing the early names from the scroll beneath the papal throne, and then following them into medieval Europe, each name linked by carefully drawn lines that seem to shimmer slightly, as though reacting to your presence. You run your finger along a branch labeled Occitania, tracing a family line that survived invasions, religious purges, and the Albigensian Crusade, a detail that stirs a faint ache in your chest as you imagine how many lives were shaped or lost by the burden of the secret. Then your eye catches a quirky tidbit scribbled in the margin beside a 14th century branch, a note claiming that one descendant was identified not by records, but because he allegedly glowed faintly during morning prayers, a detail so absurd you nearly laugh until you notice the scribe's desperate handwriting, revealing a man torn between disbelief and fear of omitting something important. Whether the glowing was metaphorical, medicinal, or a side effect of questionable medieval dietary habits, you leave to history's imagination. You move to another section marked Britannia, where the lines fade into obscurity around the time of the Norman conquest, and beside it lies an annotation in red ink. The matter remains open to debate, which is scholarly shorthand for "we have no idea what happened and we're exhausted." As you follow the branches into the Renaissance, the genealogy grows increasingly fragmented, as though the custodes struggled to keep pace with the chaos of continents expanding, cities swelling, and people moving faster than monastic record keepers could track. Yet the pattern persists. A child here, a sibling there, a marriage recorded in the margins of a liturgical calendar, a birth date hidden inside the decorative border of a psalter. The custodes were obsessed, methodical, and absolutely terrified. You can feel their fear baked into the parchment, a fear not of scandal, but of cataclysm, of what might happen if this lineage fell into the wrong hands, or, perhaps more dangerously, the right ones. The lantern's glow shifts slightly, illuminating a separate stack of parchment bound with a ribbon so faded it looks gray, and when you lift the top sheet, the breath catches in your throat. This sheet details an attempt by the custodes in the late 17th century to finalize the genealogy, to track every surviving member of the hidden bloodline and gather them in a single record. The handwriting grows frantic as it nears the bottom, letters leaning forward as though sprinting to a conclusion the scribe could no longer outrun. But the page ends abruptly, mid-sentence, followed by nothing, not a correction, not an addendum, not even a smear of ink. The genealogy simply stops. You check the stack again, flipping through dozens of sheets filled with half-finished branches, abandoned names, question marks, and ominous annotations such as missing and lost to history, but no continuation of the final line. It's as if the scribe either fled, died, or determined that the truth could not be written safely. You set the pages down, your pulse trembling in your fingertips, and you notice another parchment tucked beneath the stack, a loose sheet, almost shy in the way it hides. You pull it free, and there, written in a different hand entirely, is a single sentence. The bloodline survives, but it does not want to be found. The room exhales around you, lantern trembling, shadows stretching long across the desk, and suddenly the genealogy takes on a different tone, not a record but a pursuit, not a project but a warning. You think of all the generations involved, all the priests who labored, panicked, prayed, encoded their findings into embroidery and hymns, hiding clues inside the liturgy like monks playing celestial hide-and-seek. You imagine the burden each descendant carried without knowing it, the sense of displacement, the inexplicable protection, the strange coincidences, the unspoken intuition of being watched not by enemies, but by guardians. And you feel that presence again, the one that has followed you from vault to gallery to chamber, standing just beyond the edge of the lantern's glow. It waits, breathing softly, patiently, as though inviting you toward the final piece of the story, the piece only the custodes knew but never wrote. You step back from the desk, heart slow but heavy, the genealogical branches etched into your memory like the roots of an ancient tree wrapping themselves around your ribs. The lantern flickers once, twice, and the vault seems to lean toward you, whispering without sound. There is one last record, one last truth, and it waits deeper still beneath Rome, where the church hid not the genealogy, but the living proof of it. And with that realization, you turn toward the darkness, feeling the story pull you forward to the final revelation. You follow the corridor downward once more, deeper than any sane architect would ever expect a human being to travel, and the air grows colder, heavier, as if you're breathing history itself. Older than marble, older than scripture, older than every whispered rumor the Vatican pretends it never heard. And with each step you sense the story tightening around you, not like a trap, but like a hand guiding you gently toward a truth that has been waiting, patient and unmoving, for 2,000 years. The stone passage curves until it opens into a small antechamber where a rusted gate blocks the entrance to a room carved directly from bedrock, and on the gate hangs a single wooden plaque bearing no symbols, no Latin inscriptions, just a deep groove running diagonally across the surface, as though someone dragged a blade across it not in anger, but in warning. You lift the latch. It clicks with the resigned sigh of an object that has not been touched in generations, and push open the gate, stepping into a chamber lit only by a single lantern resting on a tall iron stand, its flames swaying gently despite the still air. The room is bare except for a long wooden table positioned before a stone altar carved with branching lines like the world's oldest family tree. And on the table lies a sealed leather codex bound with cords that look newer than they should, as though someone visited this room not centuries ago, but recently, carefully tying the knots with hands that understood exactly what they were protecting. You approach slowly, aware now that everything you've seen, the scroll beneath the papal throne, the letters from Gaul, the frantic journals of the custodes nominis, has been leading you to this one quiet object in a forgotten room beneath Rome. When you place your hands on the leather, the surface feels warm, almost alive, as if absorbing your touch, and for a moment you hesitate, sensing that once you open this codex there will be no unlearning what waits inside. But you've already come this far, and let's be honest, turning back now would be like quitting a mystery novel 2 pages before the reveal. So you untie the cords and open the cover. Inside, instead of words, the first page contains a painted symbol, a branching line ending in a single name written in Aramaic so elegantly it radiates across the page with the quiet gravity of truth. You say the name silently, feeling it settle like a stone at the bottom of a river, and when you turn the page, the codex reveals what the genealogy chamber had never completed, a full, uninterrupted lineage stretching from the 1st century to the present, each name meticulously written in ink that shifts under the lantern light, darkening where the lines tangle and lightening where branches end. The mainstream historical fact appears gently in your mind as you read. Early Christian communities in the Middle East and Mediterranean did sometimes maintain family lineages to trace connections between followers of Jesus and the earliest apostles, though none have survived intact, leaving only fragments and oral traditions that scholars analyze with a mix of fascination and frustration. Yet here in front of you lies something wholly different, a lineage not preserved by chance or accident, but curated with deliberate care by generations of priests, monks, scribes, and shadows, each adding the next branch, the next birth, the next quiet witness. And for a moment you feel the weight of all those hands guiding yours, as if the codex itself has been waiting for someone willing to read the entire story without fear. As you continue, you encounter a quirky tidbit scribbled in a margin beside a 17th century entry. A custode scribe notes that one descendant was identified not through records, but because the child instinctively recited a psalm before learning to speak, which raises a few linguistic questions you're not prepared to unpack tonight. But you give points for creativity. Another margin note mentions that the same child refused to eat figs unless they were cut into exactly 12 pieces for reasons known only to God, which may or may not qualify as evidence, depending on how much sleep you've had. You keep reading, feeling your heartbeat synchronize with the codex's quiet rhythm. And gradually the lineage approaches the modern era, its lines narrowing, converging, funneling toward a single branch marked with a small circle drawn in crimson ink, a symbol you have not seen before. Beside the circle is a short phrase written in Latin, Ultimus Custos, the final keeper. You inhale, pulse trembling, because the name that follows is not ancient, not medieval, not even distant. It is contemporary, a living person, someone walking the earth right now, not metaphorically descended, not symbolically connected, but directly, biologically tied to the ancient line preserved for 2 millennia. At this moment, the lantern flickers, casting a brief shadow across the altar, and the room feels suddenly crowded, as though filled with the echoes of everyone who has ever guarded this lineage, everyone who hid truth inside hymns and embroidery, everyone who whispered warnings into margins and prayed their work would never be discovered by the wrong eyes. You feel their presence pressing gently on your shoulders, urging you to understand what you're holding. Not a scandal, not a weapon, but a life. A single life carrying the weight of a story humanity has never fully understood. The codex ends on a final blank page with a small note at the bottom. If the name survives, so does hope. And beneath it, written more faintly, as though added in haste by a trembling hand, protect the living. The dead have done their part. You close the codex slowly, feeling the air grow softer, as though the room itself is exhaling after centuries of tension. You tie the cords gently, placing your palm on the leather one last time, and something inside you softens with it. An understanding, a quiet reverence, a recognition that sometimes the greatest secrets are not kept out of fear, but out of love, patience, and the fragile human desire to protect what cannot be replaced. And now, in these final 300 words, the story begins to settle, its sharp edges smoothing into the warm haze of night. The lantern's flame dims to a gentle golden glow that pools at your feet like liquid light, softening the shadows, blurring the stony edges of the chamber. Your breath slows, matching the easy rhythm of the flickering flame, and the cold air around you feels less like secrecy now and more like quiet company, as though the centuries are tucking themselves neatly into the corners of the room, giving you space to rest. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of the lantern wrap around you like a blanket woven from every whisper, every footstep, every hidden chamber you've explored tonight. The genealogy, the custodes, the scroll beneath the papal throne, all of it begins to drift gently to the edges of your mind, not disappearing but settling, like embers losing their heat. You inhale slowly, exhale softly, and the world around you seems to settle into stillness, the kind that feels safe, comforting, ancient. The story has been told. The burden has been acknowledged. The secret has found its witness. And as the last traces of the lantern's glow blur into darkness, you step quietly back toward the corridor, feeling lighter, quieter, and deeply, gently ready for rest.